Hey, everybody, we're back and we're continuing on in the life of St. Francis. Um, we know that Francis goes off and fights, and he fights in a war and as a knight, and he's really excited about the possibility of doing this. Now, interestingly enough, this is not some crusade to the Holy Land or anything. In those days, different districts or, say, counties would go to war against each other to kind of make money more than to take over land. And so that would be like Erie County and Niagara County going to war against one another, which seems kind of ridiculous, but that's how it worked. And you didn't go into these wars to kill people. It was to take prisoners. Because then you would take a prisoner and then they would have to be ransomed by their family. And you would extort the families for money. And that's how these wars were successful, so to speak. So Francis gets into one of these wars, and he gets captured because, again, little guy, not a great soldier. And as he's in the prison, he has this. He gets sick and delirious sick, and he has this dream. He has this dream where he is a great knight, and he walks down a hallway of knights, and at the end of this hallway is this beautiful lady sitting on a throne, like a queen, and he approaches her and he kneels down before her as if he's going to offer himself, and offer his allegiance to her. And as he looks up, he sees that this beautiful gown that this woman is wearing is now tattered rags. And he looks around and he notices that he himself, all he's just in a brown, tattered robe, and these knights that were all around him, they're in these brown, tattered robes, and they're all emaciated and hungry, and they look terrible, and it shocks him. And he looks up at the lady and he says, "Who are you?" And she says, "I am Lady Poverty, whom you will serve." And this dream kind of messes him up. So he gets ransom back, but he's still sick for quite some time, and he becomes distant. He becomes distant from his friends. He everything that he had dreamed about as far as being a knight and all the chivalry is was not what he expected. And so he would go up into the mountains, and he would go into the woods and the caves to retreat. And he would just wander around and be terribly sad. And at one point, he wanders into this old chapel that's falling down, and this was the chapel of San Damiano. And you saw that we saw the cross on the first slide. Now, San Damiano, this huge cross, was there, and he was so sad and so dejected. And he goes into this chapel, and it's all kind of ruinous and falling down. And he goes in there and he says, "Most high and glorious God, enlighten the darkness of my heart. Give me true faith, certain hope, and perfect charity, Lord, with sense and knowledge, that I might do your will." And so it's kind of a dejected prayer. And he looks up, and all of a sudden, this cross, Jesus on the cross, speaks to him. In what way, we don't know, but we hear the cross speak to Francis. And the cross says, Jesus on the cross says to Francis, "Francis, rebuild my church, which, as you can see, is falling down." And Francis is, first of all, blown away by this, as any of us would be. But, what he sees in this situation is a call to arms, not in battle, but he says to rebuild his church. And he looks around and he sees this chapel, and now he has purpose. Now he is ready to go. And so he's going to rebuild this chapel just like Jesus told him to. And so he goes to work and he rebuilds this chapel, and he goes and he runs out of money personally, so he goes to his father's store, and he kind of like takes some money from the drawer, and he is goes out and sells to get rocks to be able to build this chapel. And he begs for rocks and he's begging for money, and people are like, "This rich kid is begging for money, what, this is kind of embarrassing." And so they give it to Pietro, and Pietro's embarrassed and he's kind of mad. And his son is rebuilding this chapel down there, and he's all dirty, and he doesn't know. Um, but Francis is on a mission, and he is doing this. And his friends are like, "We haven't seen him in a while. What's he doing?" "Oh, I heard he's down rebuilding San Damiano." And so they go down from the city down into the valley where San Damiano is, and they're like, "Dude, what are you doing?" And he's like, "Oh, I'm rebuilding this chapel. Hey, could you grab me that hammer?" And so one of them goes and gives him the hammer, and the others, and suddenly he's asking him to do this and that, and suddenly the guys are all having fun and they're rebuilding this chapel, and suddenly he is um, he's got all his friends working together. Um, and so after a month or two of this, Pietro is fed up and he can't believe that his son is embarrassing him like this, and so he just wants him to come home and be the good son, right? So he goes down to the chapel and he grabs Francis by the scruff of the neck and drags him back up into the city. Now, what he does is he takes him to the center of town, and in the center of town, on one side is the bishop's residence, and the bishop, a very stern, uh, kind of conservative kind of figure, uh, always looking to maintain the status quo of the rich hierarchy that he is a part of. Um, so Pietro is pretty certain that the bishop is going to let him have it and tell him to come home. And so he throws his son down and he calls the bishop to come and hear his claim. By this, by this time now, the whole town is out, right? Again, like there's no TVs, people are not playing Xbox. They are there and they're checking this out. This is good time. And you got your popcorn ready, just watching what happens to this kid as his father is dragging him through the city. And there's one young girl who is there, maybe a teenage girl. Francis is probably like 18, 19, 20 years old, maybe, and this girl maybe 17, just looking at this boy and seeing him. And so in this square, the father lets the bishop know what the story is, and he tells him, tell my son to come home and to be a dutiful son. And Francis, in the midst of this, and the uh, you see the picture that is there below my below me is Francis takes off all of his clothes. He strips down completely naked and he folds up his clothes and lays them at his father's feet. And he says, "Father, here I return everything that you have given me because now I'm going to trust in God, my Father." And he gives back all of his father's all his worldly possessions. Now, this bishop, who is completely blown away by this, is this decision that he makes. He has he goes and he takes a robe and he wraps it around Francis and he brings him into the church and they talk for a while. Pietro is feels like he's lost his son, and people are completely blown away by this. And so that's where we'll leave off, and we'll pick up the story of St. Francis next.